Now, of those 25 cricketers you've written so well about, from Grace through Hobbs and Woolley and Hendren, Hutton, Compton, Graveney, Cowdrey, Zahir, Bradman, if you could turn back the clock to any time in history and see one of them score 100 in his prime, who would you choose?
Great question, Stephen. I just want to say one thing about Don Bradman. I never met the gentleman, but I sent him, David Frith suggested, write to him in Adelaide. I sent airmail, in those days airmail, Don Bradman, Adelaide. I sent 20 questions to him and he responded, return of post, with cogent answers to every one of my questions. I thought that was fantastic. And that was in 1982. Of all the players, it'd be Dennis Compton, genius incarnate, as some of the others were. You could say that Woolley was, well, I think Grace was a genius. But Dennis Compton made it look such fun. His running between the wickets always meant it was the basis for negotiations, wasn't it, as they say? And you never quite knew how long he'd be there for. He was evanescent, if you like, transient. Sunshine was always out when Dennis Compton was playing. And he was heroic. And what he did for that time, that immediate post-war period, he was gallant, good looking, the mop of brill-creamed hair. He scored hundreds the way we lying in our bath would want to score our hundreds. He fulfilled boyhood dreams. He was dashing and cavalier, and often just on one knee as well. 94 in 1956 against the Aussies when he was 38. How we wished he could get another 6 runs. I remember watching it on the telly. But Dennis Compton was just, he was fun, wasn't he? Some of those players, tremendous players, all of them, but some of them very zenith of their energies and purpose and efficiency they reached to get all those runs. But you had the feeling that Dennis Compton got these runs sometimes in forgetful moments. Oh, I better go out and bat. 2 hours later, he's 150 not out, having made it look ridiculous.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. Well, one of the sadnesses, I suppose, of the book is it was constrained by batsmen who scored 100 hundreds, and there have been some very, very great batsmen who didn't make the cut for whatever reason. Obviously, overseas players who didn't play enough county cricket suffer particularly from that. Now, with the book, your most recent book, The Greatest Season, Warwickshire in the summer of 1994, we had a batsman, Brian Lara. I think I could argue the case that Brian Lara, at his best, was the best batsman we've seen in the last 50 years. And that period, I would, people put Viv Richards very, very high, and rightly. I think I would put Brian Lara higher because Viv played in a very, very strong West Indies team, and Brian Lara played in a weak one. And I think it's much harder to bat when you haven't got people batting well around you and you're up against it. And some of the games he won, single-handedly almost, they're extraordinary. Now, this particular summer, and I'll get you to talk about this in a second, let me just give the intro to it. Warwickshire signed him. You can tell the story. The next week, he scored 375 and broke the world test record. He came to England, and in 6 of his next 7 innings, he scored a century, finishing with 501, the world record for all first-class cricket, a game where you were there. You're even in the picture where he's talking to the journalists after the game. And he just, has there ever been in the whole history of cricket a purpler patch for a batsman than that?
Various points you brought up then, I'll try to tick them off, Stephen. First of all, I hear what you're saying about Viv versus Lara, and Lara's performances were remarkable, particularly against that very, very strong Australian bowling attack. I'll give you that. Viv also came up against some pretty handy bowlers as well, all around the world. Viv's dominance at the crease inhibited some very, very fine bowlers. They both played a long time. It's almost impossible for me to separate the two. Different sorts of players as well. I really admired Viv's physical bravery. Never wore a helmet. He was still playing, helping Glamorgan win the Sunday League at the age of 41, 42. But as for your point about those 5 weeks, I don't believe in the history of the game anyone has played better in that 5-6 weeks than Brian Lara in all conditions. Beginning with the 3-7-5, perfect wicket, fairly demoralised England bowling attack, not the best bowling attack of our time for a start. Right at the end, the 5-0-1 against a demoralised Durham bowling attack, lacking 2 frontline bowlers as well. But in between, different innings and different circumstances, the 200s he got against Leicestershire to save the game for Warwickshire against the next best opponents that year. David Milne's one of the bowlers, fine bowler. I talked to him for the book, and he came off and he said to his captain and Alan Mullally, we could not have bowled any better than that in our careers than we've done today. And Lara played him with a stick of rhubarb. And Neil Smith, for example, at the other end, he said it was quite remarkable how Lara farmed the strike, refusing long singles whenever he wanted to. Masterful innings. And don't forget the 70-odd he got the day after the 5-0-1 not out, batting at number 6 to help Warwickshire win the B&H quarter-final, semi-final against a very, very strong Surrey bowling attack. So all across the board in that 5-6 weeks, different kinds of innings, different circumstances, different weather, an astonishing performance from a great batsman. And I don't often use that. I try very hard in my sports reporting to limit the word great. But Brian Lara definitely deserves that accolade, as does Viv Richards. And by the way, what a bargain for Warwickshire. MJK Smith, the England manager, was out there, and he was chairman of Warwickshire at the time. Prabhakar got injured. Warwickshire, at a speedy rate of knots, ushered him out of the door, made sure he was looked after. Off you go. Thanks for coming. Because they had Lara. They signed Lara for 40 grand before the 3-7-5. And I'm told that Warwickshire trebled their membership and as a result paid for Lara's £40,000 fee 3 times over once he signed. What a great piece of business for Warwickshire that was. That was the steal of the century.
Yes, and that was the start of a summer in which Warwickshire won the championship, won the Benson and Hedges, won the Sunday League, and but for losing the toss at Lord's in a September game, would have won the NatWest as well.
Worcestershire will say they would have won the B&H in July when Warwickshire won the toss on a wet pitch. But hey, you're quite right. In the history of the game, 1877 onwards, county championship started. In the history of the game, nobody has approached that dominance, because I maintain the championship is the blue ribbon. I pay due respect to Gloucestershire, who won so much the noughties, the late 90s, early 200. I get all that, but I do believe you've got to win the championship first and then see what else you win that summer to stack yourself up against the great sides. They weren't the greatest side. I think Surrey in the 50s, Yorkshire in the 30s, Lancashire in the 20s. There were lots of other very, very fine counties. They weren't the greatest side because he didn't have the greatest collection of players. He had one great player and some very, very fine backup players as well. But at the same time, I don't think statistically anybody can match what Warwickshire did.
And there were a couple of people there that were crucial to the success, and one was the coach, Bob Woolmer. Talk a little bit about what was the X factor that Bob Woolmer brought to any side that he coached?
Imagination, thoroughness, energy, positivity, thoughtfulness at the same time, and the sword would always be in the scabbard, apart from now and then when he'd take it out and administer a rollicking. The Warwickshire players revered him. He was a shocking watcher. They used to tell him, shut up, Bob, go somewhere else, because he fussed. He said, why is he playing that shot? What's he doing? Oh, there's runs there. He just lived and breathed cricket, and he was much respected because of that. But at the same time, the Warwickshire players said, go on, get in the gym. As a result, Bob would sit on the bike. He had the thickest, strongest, most muscular legs in the Warwickshire dressing room because he was always on the bike because the players had banned him. But he was an encyclopedia of cricket. In my study, I've got Bob Woolmer's book of coaching, which is an enormous book, doorstop incarnate. And the thought and the imagination that went into that book is quite remarkable. I love talking to Bob. I knew him when he was an England player, always used to bump into him at various stages around the world. he was such a loss to the game, died so young, but at the same time, he made so many other people's careers better. Even Brian Lara would agree that Woolmer was worth listening to. And inspirational choice by Andy Lloyd, who was Warwickshire captain at the time, went out to get Lara out and get Woolmer out in Cape Town, 90 for 91 season. And wow, why he was not England coach still baffles me. And you get the Warwickshire players at that stage who played for England or been close to the England team during that period, you get them talking about Bob Woolmer's suitability to the England captain and stand back and hear the blast. They fulminate still that Bob Woolmer wasn't England's coach, that he had to go back to South Africa, where he'd lived for a long time, to be the national coach there. He was that good.
Yes. Now, at the end of that summer, when Warwickshire had carried all before it, there were two England tours, a main tour and an A tour. And Keith Piper, the Warwickshire keeper, was chosen for the A tour. He was the only Warwickshire player on either of those parties. And I wonder, it's a strange thing to say about Warwickshire because it's a big county with a lot of money that stages test matches. But I can't help feeling sometimes that it's a slightly unfashionable county in a lot of circles. Do you feel that?
Very difficult one to answer with any absolute dogmatism. There have been plenty of Warwickshire players who've played for England. Jury's out on that one for me at the moment, Stephen, because I can't quite be certain of that. But what I can be certain of was at that time in 1994, they were the most unpopular county. It was partly due to the fact that they were winning everything. Secondly, they really were tough out there in the field and got up the nose of various influential people. Piper, Dermot Reeve, Roger Toos, they liked a bunny. They were really provocative in the field. They had any amount of lovely blokes like Tim Muntin, Dominic Osler, Gladstone Small, who were just lovely people to deal with, and they're hugely popular around the shires. But I'm not sure just how popular in the portals of influence Warwickshire were. They weren't with Lancashire in particular. They had some very, very bitter battles with Lancashire. And at that time, Michael Atherton was England captain, and David Lloyd was the England coach after Raymond Illingworth cashed his chips in 94-5. So I think there was an element, therefore, of annoyance. Reeve in particular, I believe, should have captained England in one-day internationals on merit alone, rather than Atherton. So there was that. Also, we get back to the point I made earlier, that there were any amount of really, really fine players. I'm not necessarily sure they were all fundamental England players. Osler could have been given a chance, wonderful all-round fielder. Dennis Amiss and MJK, I think he was the best all-round fielder Warwickshire ever had. Tim Muntin was just Tim Muntin, but in English conditions. Piper, to my mind, was the best wicketkeeper around at that time, and no less an authority than Jack Russell said to me for the book. Jack Russell said he was the best in the world, and Jack felt he was the best he'd ever seen. So you put that to one side and you think, Then again, Jack Russell was in that England team as well. Would Keith Piper have kept him out? Roger Toos, I think, was a loss. I think Roger Toos would have made a lot out of himself at the higher level. He went on to have a decent career with New Zealand. That's why he left, because he wasn't getting any England preferment. But, you know, I think Warwickshire quite liked the them and us syndrome. Millwall FC, if you like, in cricketing terms. And the following year, they won 2 more trophies, by the way, making in 24 months. And I think Warwickshire were quite happy being the underdogs or the team that people didn't like. In the book, you may recall, Stephen, you edited it, for heaven's sake, I had a chapter from all the other players who'd been up against Warwickshire on behalf of the other counties. And although they were complimentary, there were quite a few who were quite scabrous and scathing of the Warwickshire players on a personal level. So all that goes in the pot, doesn't it, when you're talking about playing for England? England used to have lots and lots of nice guys who played for England, but then again, we get rolled out for 115.
Yes. Now, the real hero of the book, I thought, you had Dermot Reeve as a rather difficult captain who you had Brian Lara, who had his moods as well, and everything. For a team winning everything, there was an awful lot of rocky stuff going on in the dressing room. And the person who came through as the real Mr. Sensible who held the show together was Tim Muntin.
No question. But I'd like to point out that in any walk of life, just because things look wonderful and serene and you're doing well and positive, whether it's in an office or newspaper, the BBC or wherever, publishing, if you like, there are always elements underneath the water. Chemistry, a cabinet, for example. Not everybody sings from the same hymn sheet, do they? And I don't, Harold Wilson called it creative tension, I remember, when he had his cabinet of all the dons and all the intellectuals. So things aren't ever quite as simple as they seem. So I don't think it was much of a problem that there were feuds and internecine disputes. Fair play to them all for keeping it on the level, but Muntin was absolutely crucial, not least of all a very, very fine bowler. And I remember in September when the season was over, Matthew Engel, the editor of Wisden, rang me up and he said, "Who do you think has been the most influential people in that Warwickshire side?" And I said, straight away, I said, with respect to all of them, I say Tim Muntin. He said, "Good, I'm glad you said that, because I'm making him one of the 5 cricketers of the year. And I want you to write the profile of Tim." So I had the great pleasure of going to see Tim and breaking the news to him. And don't forget, Stephen, when you name the Wisden Cricket of the Year in September/October, you've got to keep it quiet until April. Tim, typically gentleman, he said, "I'll do that, Pat, but can I tell my dad?" And of course, I felt like the Lord's bountiful. Of course you can, my dear chap. I don't know what the male version of hyacinth bouquet is, but I said basically, of course, have that one on me. So Tim Muntin, yes, and much loved by all the Warwickshire players, enormously popular. Every time you walk in the room with Tim, people still gravitate towards him, not least of all to say, "You're stacking on a bit of weight here, Muntz, get some of that off you." But a wonderful man.
Yes. Well, we'll leave those 2 books there now, because it was my privilege to publish the 2 of them. I've managed to reacquire 3 or 4 second-hand copies of the Centurions, and I've still got
Excellent.
The Greatest Season. So a plug here, if anybody listening wants, get in touch with me afterwards. But I thought The Greatest Season, you followed John Arlett's advice, get to know the cricketers beautifully.
Thank
and those
you.
Individual profiles of each and every one of them, right through to Dickie Davis, who died tragically young, a wonderfully moving piece. And that generosity of Brian Lara in giving his helmet, where he scored the 501, to the charity after Dickie Davis died.
Dickie's
I
widow.
was reading that again this morning, and there were tears in my eyes reading it. And you were right in there with those people. And not only the players, the dressing room attendant, and Keith Cook, the operations manager, and everybody, the whole club.
Physio, the physio who got those players out on the field.
Yes.
Who admittedly, he knew nothing about cricket. He knew all about team spirit and everything else, and those intangibles. And I thought Stuart Nottingham was a really important member of all that. And Dennis Amiss, his first year as chief executive. What a steep learning curve he had. Wow. MJK.
Yes. And of course, going back, Dennis Amiss is in the Centurions. And at one stage, he was sent to Coventry by the whole of the rest of the Warwickshire team because he signed for Packer, didn't he? And he looked like he was going to have to leave Warwickshire, and yet finished up giving his whole life to the county, hasn't he?
I used to sit with Dennis in the dining room when the Warwickshire players weren't talking to him, and just rub salt in the wounds. He'd be writing letters on World Series notepaper. I used to sit there thinking, "Oh my God, there's mates of mine in there won't talk to you. I'm very fond of you, Dennis. I'm sat in the middle of them all."
Well, it's a tribute to him that they overcame that in the end, didn't they?
I think Dennis Amiss was an absolutely crucial factor in peace breaking out in March '79, because Packer made it quite clear that unless Warwickshire offered him another contract, and why wouldn't he? He was the only person who scored 2,000 runs in the wet summer in 1978 in the country. And unless they offered him a new contract, there was going to be no peace. And once Warwickshire got Amiss back on side, Packer agreed to the deal, and then peace broke out. But Dennis Amiss, crucial factor in that rapprochement.
Yes.